The morning of October 14th, 2021 started like any other on Cedarwood Lane. Sprinklers ticking, a mockingbird somewhere in the oak trees, the smell of autumn coming down from the Blue Ridge. And then, a pearl-white 2022 Mercedes-Benz GLS 580 sitting dead center in front of Staff Sergeant Raymond Kowalski's driveway. Again, Raymond stood on his front porch in the gray pre-dawn, coffee mug in hand, staring at that SUV. His jaw was tight, his eyes were calm, that particular kind of calm that men learn in places most people will never go. He set his mug down slowly on the porch rail, pulled out his phone, and dialed. But this time he wasn't calling a tow truck. This time he was calling someone he hadn't spoken to in 11 years. A man named Colonel David Pritchard, who now worked out of a federal building in Charlotte, North Carolina. And when David picked up on the second ring, Raymond said 4 words. "Dave, I need a favor. Let me tell you about Cedarwood Lane." Nestled at the edge of Briar Falls, North Carolina, a quiet community of about 14,000 people sitting in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, roughly 40 minutes east of Asheville, Cedarwood Lane was the kind of street that real estate agents described as charming and longtime residents described as home. 11 houses, a cul-de-sac at the end shaped like a teardrop, ancient red oak trees lining both sides, planted in 1962 by the neighborhood association when the street was first paved. By 2021, those oaks had grown tall enough that their canopies touched in the middle, creating a cathedral arch of leaves that turned amber and gold every October. The lawns were tended, the mailboxes were painted. At Halloween, every porch had pumpkins. At Christmas, somebody always organized a coordinated lights display. In the summer, children rode bikes up and down the sidewalk until the streetlights came on, and parents sat in lawn chairs on driveways, talking about nothing important in the best possible way. Number 14 Cedarwood Lane had a vegetable garden along the south fence. Number 7 had 2 golden labs who barked at squirrels but nobody else. Number 22, at the very end of the cul-de-sac, had a wind chime on the porch that played in the mountain breeze every single afternoon around 3 o'clock, regular as a clock. This was a neighborhood where people still waved from across the street, where people still meant it. And at number 19 Cedarwood Lane, third house on the left with a flagpole in the front yard and a modest tan brick ranch that had been freshly painted the spring before, there lived Raymond Kowalski. Staff Sergeant Raymond Allen Kowalski, United States Marine Corps, retired. Born April 3, 1968 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the second of 4 children. His father worked the railroad. His mother taught 3rd grade for 30 years. Raymond enlisted in the Marine Corps at 18 in the summer of 1986, and what followed was 22 years of service that took him to more places than most people could find on a map. Okinawa, Kuwait, Iraq, twice, Fallujah, Ramadi. He served as a combat engineer, then cross-trained into military police. He was the kind of Marine who other Marines talked about in the way that men reserve for people they genuinely trust with their lives. Unflappable, precise. The man you wanted next to you when things went sideways. He retired in 2008 with a chest full of decorations. The Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with a Combat V, the Combat Action Ribbon, the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, and a Purple Heart earned in Ramadi in 2006 when an IED took out the left side of his Humvee and left him with a partial hearing loss in his left ear and a 3-inch scar along his jawline that he did ever since. He didn't talk about Ramadi. He came to Briar Falls in 2012 after his wife, Carol, 31 years his partner, mother of his 2 children, keeper of his sanity through 4 deployments, lost her battle with ovarian cancer. He'd bought the house on Cedarwood Lane because Carol had always wanted to retire somewhere with real seasons, somewhere with mountains. He finished what she'd started and he stayed. By 2021, Raymond Kowalski was 53 years old. His dark hair had gone silver at the temples. He walked with a slight hitch in his right knee, an old injury that bothered him in the cold. He grew tomatoes and peppers in his side garden from May through September. He drove a 2015 Ford F-250 pickup, dark blue, that he maintained himself on Saturday mornings. He coached youth baseball in the spring, the 12 and under division, not because anyone asked him to, but because there were kids on the block who needed someone steady in their lives, and Raymond understood steady. He made birdhouses in a small workshop behind his house, gave them away to neighbors at Christmas. His next-door neighbor on the left, Dolores Hutchins, 71, a retired schoolteacher who'd lived on Cedarwood Lane since 1985, once told the woman at the hair salon that Raymond Kowalski was the kind of man they don't make anymore. She wasn't wrong. His one wound, the one that never fully healed, wasn't the knee, wasn't the ear, it was the quiet. Carol's absence had left a silence in that house on Cedarwood Lane that Raymond had never quite learned to fill. He managed it. He functioned. He coached baseball and grew tomatoes and made birdhouses and waved at neighbors from across the street. But on certain evenings, particularly in October, when the leaves turned the color Carol had loved best, he sat on that porch with his coffee and stared at something only he could see. Those evenings, Dolores sometimes brought him a plate of something. She never said anything, just set it on the rail and went back home, and Raymond appreciated that more than words could say. Now, let me tell you about the house at number 21 Cedarwood Lane. The house at number 21 had been empty for 7 months when the moving truck arrived on a warm Friday evening in late May of 2021. Raymond was in his workshop when he heard it, that particular rumble of a large diesel truck working its way up the quiet street. He wiped sawdust from his hands, came around the side of the house, and watched. The truck was one of those high-end private moving companies, white-gloved service, the kind that charges by the item. Behind it came a pearl-white 2022 Mercedes-Benz GLS 580, brand new, temporary dealer tag still on it, and behind that, a gunmetal gray BMW 5 Series. Raymond leaned against the corner of his house and watched two movers in matching polo shirts begin unloading furniture that cost more than most people's cars. And then the woman stepped out of the Mercedes. Veronica Ashford Blake. 41 years old, originally from Greenwich, Connecticut, married, technically, to a pharmaceutical executive named Grant Blake who traveled 80% of the time and seemed, from all evidence, to be in a permanent state of negotiating his way out of the marriage. Veronica had a degree in art history from Vanderbilt that she referenced in conversation at least twice per hour. She had worked briefly in luxury real estate in Atlanta before deciding that working was not, in her words, her calling. Her calling, apparently, was managing a lifestyle brand on Instagram with 240,000 followers. The account was called @Veronica Lives Well, where she posted photographs of floral arrangements, Italian holidays, and $400 scented candles with captions about intentional living. She was tall, blonde hair that cost $500 every 6 weeks to maintain. She was wearing white linen pants and oversized sunglasses, and she surveyed the neighborhood with the precise expression of someone who has purchased something and is now wondering if they overpaid. Her 6-year-old daughter, Mila, scrambled out of the backseat and immediately began trying to pet the neighbor's dog through the fence at number 17. The daughter seemed perfectly lovely. The mother barely noticed. Raymond walked over, the way you do on Cedarwood Lane, to say welcome. He extended his hand. Raymond Kowalski, number 19, right next door. Need anything, don't hesitate. Veronica Ashford Blake looked at his hand, then at him, then at the birdhouse workshop visible behind his house. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. That's very quaint, she said, and walked inside her new house. Raymond stood there a moment, lowered his hand, went back to his workshop. He didn't say anything, but he noted it. That was the first red flag. The first of many. It started with the driveway. Raymond's driveway ran along the shared property line between numbers 19 and 21. Standard single-car width, but he'd widened the apron slightly at the street, his own concrete, his own expense, poured back in 2014, so he could comfortably back his F-250 out without clipping the curb. 3 days after Veronica moved in, Raymond walked outside at 7 in the morning and found the Mercedes-Benz parked directly across his driveway apron. Not on the street, not in her own driveway, directly across his, blocking him in completely. He stood there, considered it, walked to her door and knocked. Veronica answered in a silk robe, coffee in hand, looking like someone interrupted mid-photo shoot. "Your car is blocking my driveway," Raymond said, calm, even quiet. Veronica blinked. "Oh, yes, the movers left some things in my garage. It'll be moved when I have a moment." "I've got a thing this morning," Raymond said. "If you could move it now, I'd appreciate it." She moved it 40 minutes later. "No apology." Raymond logged it in a small brown notebook he kept on the kitchen counter. Date, time, description. He'd started keeping notes the morning after she arrived for reasons he couldn't fully articulate yet. A habit from military life: document everything. You never know what you'll need. Chekhov's gun planted, the brown notebook. It happened again 4 days later, then again the following week. Each time Raymond knocked, each time there was a delay, each time Veronica acted as though the inconvenience was somehow being imposed upon her. By the 3rd week of June, it had happened 6 times. On the 7th, Raymond knocked on her door and Veronica, instead of acknowledging the problem, tilted her head and said, "And I want you to hear this clearly. I honestly don't understand why you're always so worked up about this. Maybe you should talk to someone about your stress. I have a great therapist." Raymond looked at her for a long moment. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to ask you one more time to please not block my driveway." He turned and walked back to his house. She laughed, not at him exactly, just she laughed. The way people laugh when they've decided someone beneath them isn't worth managing. "Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried, genuinely tried, to handle a neighbor problem like an adult, with respect and patience, only to be treated like you were the problem? Drop a comment right now and tell me your story. Because the comment section on videos like this one tells me that what Raymond was experiencing is not rare, not even close to rare. It just doesn't usually end the way this one does. By the time July arrived, the driveway blockings had reached 11. But Veronica Ashford Blake, it turned out, was just warming up. On a Tuesday evening in early July, hot, humid, the air thick with the smell of honeysuckle, Raymond came home from baseball practice to find a pile of cardboard boxes and packing material stacked against his mailbox. Not hers, his. She'd set her moving debris on his property and left it there. He photographed it, logged it, moved it himself because he didn't have time for another conversation. The following week, her landscapers, a crew she'd hired to rip out the old bushes and install something she'd called more architectural, dumped a load of soil and dead root material in the 3-foot strip along their shared fence line, Raymond's side of the fence. He photographed it, logged it. Then came the HOA. Briar Falls had a homeowners association, a fairly mild-mannered one, run by a man named Phil Garrett who worked in insurance and mostly cared about whether your lawn was mowed and your holiday lights came down before February. Veronica had apparently attended her first HOA meeting in June and come away with opinions. Raymond received a formal HOA letter in late July informing him that his outdoor workshop structure, the birdhouse workshop he'd built legally, with a permit, in 2014, was potentially non-compliant with aesthetic standards and requesting he submit documentation. Raymond called Phil Garrett. "Phil, you know about my workshop, it's been there 7 years. Phil sighed the sigh of a man caught between his job and his conscience. She submitted a formal complaint. "Ray, I have to process it. Just send me the permit records and I'll close it out." Raymond sent the permit records. The complaint was closed in 8 days. But he logged it. Then came August. August 14th to be specific. A Saturday, Raymond was in the backyard running his drip irrigation system. It was the driest summer in 6 years and his pepper plants were suffering. He came around the front of the house and stopped. His mailbox, a simple post-mounted metal box he'd had for 9 years, was on the ground. The post was snapped at the base. It could have been an accident, a delivery truck maybe. It happened. Except the paint on the broken post had a specific mark on it, a scrape with white transfer paint in it. Pearl white. Raymond photographed the scrape, pulled the SD card from the small security camera he'd mounted above his garage door back in June, the day after Veronica first laughed at him. He'd installed it quietly, the way a man with military intelligence training does things, without announcement, without fanfare. The footage showed Veronica's Mercedes backing out of her driveway at a wide angle on Friday evening, clipping the mailbox post, pausing for 2 seconds, and then pulling away. She hadn't stopped, hadn't knocked, hadn't mentioned it. Raymond noted the footage timestamp in his brown notebook. Then he fixed the mailbox himself, because that was the kind of man he was. And in September, on a warm evening when the first leaves were just beginning to hint at gold, Raymond came home to find that someone had salted the strip of lawn along the shared fence line. The grass was dead in a perfect line, 3 feet wide, 40 feet long, like someone had walked it deliberately. His tomato plants, which grew along that fence, were wilted and dying at the roots. He knelt down in the dirt, pressed his fingers into the soil, smelled it. Salt, no question. He photographed it, he called a soil testing service, he logged it. He did not say a word to Veronica Ashford Blake. He just went inside, sat in his kitchen at the table where Carol used to drink her morning tea, and he opened his brown notebook and wrote the date and a brief description, the way he'd done 17 times before now. And then he picked up his phone and called his son, Daniel, who was a first-year law student at UNC Chapel Hill. "Son," he said, "I need you to explain something called tortious interference to me." The 18th time happened on a Thursday morning, October 14th, 2021. But before we get there, I need to tell you what happened on October 9th. Carol Kowalski had loved roses. Specifically, she had loved a climbing rose bush she'd planted along the back fence of number 19 in the spring of 2013, the first spring after they'd moved in. A variety called New Dawn, pale pink, nearly white at the edges, with a fragrance that Carol said reminded her of her grandmother's house. Every May it exploded into bloom. Raymond had maintained it meticulously for 8 years, the way a man tends something his wife loved. It had grown up and over the fence, 12 feet of it, a beautiful, living thing. On the afternoon of October 9th, Raymond was at baseball practice. When he came home, the rose bush was gone. Not damaged, not trimmed. Gone. Cut at the base, every cane, every stem, every last tendril that had climbed the fence, cut. The stumps remained 3 inches above the soil, already beginning to weep sap in the cold air. On Veronica's side of the fence, he could see through the slats. She was having a new trellis installed, a modern, geometric thing in powder-coated steel, and the climbing rose canes that had crossed over the fence line, her legal right to trim, technically, had been cut not at the fence line. They'd been cut at his side, down to the roots. Raymond stood in his backyard in the October dusk. The wind chime at number 22 played its 3-note song, the smell of cut grass from someone 3 houses down, the first stars appearing above the Blue Ridge. He stood there for a long time. His neighbor Dolores from her back porch saw him standing there and said nothing, just watched, the way you watch someone absorbing something painful. Finally, Raymond walked inside, set his keys on the hook by the door, sat down at the kitchen table, opened the brown notebook, and wrote October 9, 2021, rose bush, all of it. He closed the notebook. He didn't cry, he didn't rage, he didn't go next door and knock on that door and say a single word. He just sat in the kitchen where Carol used to drink her tea, in the house where Carol had always wanted to live, and he was very, very quiet. And then, 5 days later, on the morning of October 14th, he woke at 5:30, the way he always did, made coffee the way he always did, went to the front porch in the dark the way he always did. And there was the Mercedes-Benz, blocking his driveway. For the 18th time. Now let me pause here and say something directly to you. If you think Raymond is going to let this go, if you think this man is going to call Phil Garrett at the HOA one more time, or knock on that door one more time, or log one more entry in that brown notebook and go quietly back to his life, you've never met a man like Raymond Kowalski. Here's what nobody knew at the time. Well, almost nobody. Raymond Kowalski's 22 years in the Marine Corps had not been entirely straightforward. Yes, he'd been a combat engineer. Yes, he'd been military police. But from 2001 through 2008, in the last and most consequential years of his service, Raymond had been attached to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, in a liaison capacity, working criminal and financial investigations connected to military contractors operating in Iraq. He'd learned during those years how investigations worked, how evidence was compiled, preserved, and presented. He'd learned what was legally actionable and what was theater. He'd learned how property law intersected with criminal law. He'd learned patience, the particular weaponized patience of a man who knows that moving too soon destroys a case. He'd been waiting since June for the right moment. The rose bush had told him the moment was now. And his friend Colonel David Pritchard, whom he'd called on the morning of October 14th, standing on the porch with his coffee, was not just a contact. David Pritchard was a recently retired Marine JAG officer who had spent the last 2 years as a senior investigator with the North Carolina Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Unit. When Raymond said, "Dave, I need a favor," what David heard was, "I have a case, I need you to help me build it right." David drove up from Charlotte that same afternoon, sat at Raymond's kitchen table, and listened for 2 hours while Raymond walked him through the brown notebook, page by page, every incident, every photograph, every date and time. The footage from the garage camera. The soil test results showing deliberate salt contamination. The HOA records. The documentation of the mailbox damage. And then David Pritchard leaned back in his chair and said, "Ray, did you know she's also been doing this to the houses on the other side?" Raymond looked at him. Turns out, and this is the part that the audience needs to hear, because it changes everything, Veronica Ashford Blake had, in the 6 months since moving to Cedarwood Lane, filed 14 complaints with both the HOA and the Briar Falls Municipal Code Enforcement Office, against multiple neighbors. She complained about number 17's fence height. She'd filed a noise complaint against number 22's wind chime. She'd complained about the landscaping at number 14. She'd even filed a complaint with the county against the elderly man at number 7, Gus Petrano, 74 years old, a retired postal worker, claiming his 2 golden labs were a public nuisance. Phil Garrett at the HOA had been quietly collecting these complaints and flagging them as frivolous. He was, it turned out, furious. And here's the thing that David Pritchard told Raymond next, the thing that shifted everything. "She also tried to file a complaint against your workshop again last month. Different grounds this time, claimed it was affecting property values. Phil didn't process it, but she hired a property attorney to draft a formal demand letter. I pulled the bar records on him. The attorney she hired, he's currently under a disciplinary review for misconduct in 2 other property cases." Raymond absorbed that. "And the salt damage to your garden," David continued, "combined with the mailbox footage and her pattern of conduct, that's a civil case. Potentially criminal mischief, and the rose bush." He opened his laptop. Under North Carolina General Statute 14-127, willful and wanton destruction of personal property, including living plants and trees with documented sentimental or monetary value, is a criminal offense. The rose bush, documented, photographed, with a soil assessment from a licensed arborist. Raymond had hired the arborist 2 weeks after the rose bush was destroyed. The assessment had valued the mature new dawn climbing rose, given its age, its height, its health, at $1,200, a small number in isolation. Not so small when combined with everything else. David Pritchard had spent 30 years as a JAG officer. He knew how to build a case. And what Raymond had documented in that brown notebook with receipts and photographs and timestamped security footage was not just a neighbor dispute. It was a pattern, a documented, sustained pattern of harassment, property damage, and abuse of municipal complaint processes. "You file all of this," David told him, "with the right attorney in the right court, and she won't just lose. She'll lose in a way she can't come back from." Raymond nodded slowly. He poured David another cup of coffee. And then he made one more phone call. To a woman named Margaret Chu, a civil litigation attorney in Asheville who specialized in property law and neighbor harassment cases, and who had, in her 17-year career, never lost a case that went to trial. The morning of November 18, 2021 was cold, 38 degrees at dawn, The oaks on Cedarwood Lane had gone bare, their branches reaching up against a gray sky like something drawn in charcoal, frost on the windshields, breath visible in the air. Raymond was up at 5:30, the way he always was. He made a full pot of coffee, poured himself a mug, the old one, heavy ceramic, the one Daniel had given him the Christmas after Carol died. He put on a flannel shirt and his old Marine Corps jacket, dark green, worn soft over 30 years, and he walked out to his front porch. And he sat down. And he waited. At 7:15, Margaret Chu's assistant sent him a text, en route, 20 minutes. At 7:41, two vehicles turned onto Cedarwood Lane. A Buncombe County Sheriff's Department patrol unit, and behind it, a plain white sedan with a county seal on the door. They parked in front of number 21. Raymond sipped his coffee. At 7:45, the front door of number 21 opened. Veronica Ashford Blake stepped out in a cream cashmere robe, holding a green smoothie, her hair up, looking at her phone. She was planning to post something, probably something intentional. She looked up and saw the sheriff's deputy walking up her front path with a woman in a gray coat carrying a document folder. "Good morning, Ms. Ashford Blake," the deputy said. "We have some paperwork for you." She was served at 7:47 in the morning with a civil lawsuit filed in Buncombe County Superior Court, case number 21 CVS 4471, by plaintiff Raymond Allen Kowalski, represented by Margaret T. Chu, attorney at law. The complaint ran 43 pages. It documented 17 incidents of intentional driveway obstruction, constituting harassment and tortious interference with quiet enjoyment of property. The mailbox destruction, criminal mischief under NCGS 14127. The salting of his lawn and garden, willful destruction of property. The rose bush, willful destruction of a documented personal property asset with sentimental and monetary value. The 14 frivolous HOA and municipal complaints filed in bad faith, abuse of process, a recognized civil tort in North Carolina. Attorney fees from Raymond's prior HOA defense, the arborist assessment, the soil test, 6 months of security camera footage cataloged and indexed by date and time. The total damages sought, $214,000 plus attorney fees, plus punitive damages, plus a permanent injunction prohibiting Veronica Ashford Blake from filing any further complaints regarding Raymond Kowalski's property without documented cause. She stood on her front path in the frost in her cashmere robe, holding her green smoothie, reading the first page. Her face went very still. Raymond on his porch did not watch. He looked out toward the end of Cedarwood Lane, where the bare oak branches crossed against the gray sky. He sipped his coffee. But here's what happened next, and this is the part that even Raymond didn't entirely anticipate. When Margaret Chu's team had filed the civil suit, they had simultaneously sent a formal notification to the Briar Falls Municipal Code Enforcement Office, the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department, and the North Carolina State Bar, regarding the disciplinary questions around Veronica's attorney of record. That notification triggered a review. That review discovered something. The attorney Veronica had hired, a man named Bradley Holt, of Holt and Associates in Asheville, had in the previous 18 months filed over 60 frivolous property complaints and demand letters on behalf of various clients, in a pattern that investigators described as a systematic harassment practice designed to intimidate property owners into selling or settling. A pattern that, when examined by the right eyes, began to look less like zealous representation and more like a coordinated scheme. 3 of Bradley Holt's other clients were named in the investigation. Veronica Ashford Blake was one of them. On November 19th, the morning after the civil suit was served, a detective from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department arrived at number 21 Cedarwood Lane with a second set of documents. Not a lawsuit this time. Criminal charges. Misdemeanor criminal mischief for the mailbox. Misdemeanor criminal mischief for the rose bush. Felony criminal mischief for the documented, intentional salting of Raymond's garden and lawn. The soil test had confirmed the salt concentration was far beyond accidental levels, and a receipt discovered during the discovery process showed Veronica had purchased 40 pounds of sodium chloride at a hardware store in Weaverville 3 days before the damage appeared. Veronica Ashford Blake was handcuffed on the doorstep of 21 Cedarwood Lane at 8:19 in the morning of November 19, 2021. She was placed in a sheriff's vehicle, still in her cashmere robe, her phone still in her hand. The deputy was professional and quiet about it. The street, however, Cedarwood Lane on a cold November morning, was not entirely empty. Dolores Hutchins was getting her mail. Phil Garrett, the HOA chair, happened to be driving by on his way to work. Old Gus Petrano from number 7 was walking his 2 golden labs. And at number 19 on the porch, Raymond Kowalski sat with his coffee mug and his flannel shirt and his old marine jacket. He didn't watch the sheriff's vehicle leave. He looked out toward the end of the street where the bare oaks crossed against the sky. The wind chime at number 22 played its 3 notes in the cold air. Raymond's jaw was loose, his eyes were calm. He finished his coffee. After the sheriff's vehicle turned off Cedarwood Lane, something interesting happened. Nothing. For about 30 seconds, the street was absolutely silent. The mockingbird was quiet. The dogs at number 7 sat down. Even the wind seemed to pause, the way wind sometimes does in November in the mountains. And then Dolores Hutchins, standing at her mailbox in her garden clogs and her blue cardigan, looked over at Raymond on the porch. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. And Raymond nodded back. Phil Garrett in his car sat for a moment at the curb, then rolled down his window. "Ray," he said. That was all, just his name, said in a particular way. Raymond raised his coffee mug an inch in acknowledgement. Gus Petrano's dogs pulled him toward number 19, the way dogs always pull toward the person they've decided they like best. Gus let them go, and they trotted up Raymond's porch steps and sat on either side of him like golden sentinels. Gus stood at the end of the path and shook his head slowly, with a small smile. "Told her those dogs were a nuisance," he said. "Can you believe that?" Raymond scratched behind the ear of the dog on his left. "I can believe it," he said. Inside number 21, Veronica's daughter Mila, who had been taken to a neighbor's house while the situation unfolded, reportedly spent the morning playing with the cats at number 14. The neighbors there, a couple named Thomas and Bate Alvarez, said she was a perfectly sweet child and they were sorry for what she was going through, and they wished things had gone differently, for the girl's sake at least. Veronica Ashford Blake was processed, released on bond, and driven home by her husband Grant, who had flown in from wherever he'd been, looking like a man who had absorbed very bad news on a very long flight. He did not speak to anyone on Cedarwood Lane. He walked from his rental car to the front door of number 21 with his collar up and his eyes down. The pearl-white Mercedes did not move from that driveway for 11 days. When it did move, it was to the airport. Grant Blake had apparently decided that the time had come to make certain decisions about the marriage that he'd been negotiating his way out of for 2 years. Veronica had given him what he needed, an undeniable reason. He filed for divorce in December. The moving truck came in January. The criminal charges against Veronica Ashford Blake were resolved in March of 2022. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of misdemeanor criminal mischief. The felony charge, the salting of the lawn, was reduced to a misdemeanor as part of a plea agreement, contingent on restitution. She was sentenced to 12 months of unsupervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full restitution. The civil suit settled in May of 2022, 4 months after she'd moved out, for $163,000, inclusive of property damages, documented harassment losses, legal fees, and a contribution to Raymond's loss of quiet enjoyment as defined under North Carolina Civil Code. Bradley Holt, the attorney, had his license suspended by the North Carolina State Bar for 18 months and was under continued investigation for his broader pattern of conduct. 2 of his other clients were also facing civil suits. Veronica's Instagram account, @VeronicaLivesWell, went quiet in November 2021 and was deleted in February 2022. She relocated to Atlanta, where she'd had family connections. There were reports, secondhand, through the kind of neighborhood network that small streets maintain for years, that the divorce had not been kind to her financially, that Grant's attorneys had been thorough, and that the Instagram career had not recovered. What happened on Cedarwood Lane, though, that's the part of the story worth telling. The settlement covered more than Raymond's legal fees. Some of it he put away. Some of it he donated to the youth baseball program in Briar Falls, and some of it, a specific amount he never told anyone, he used in the spring of 2022. He hired a master gardener from Asheville, a woman who specialized in climbing roses. She came in April when the mountain air smelled like pine and new soil and something about to begin. She examined the root stumps, still in the ground, still alive, the way new dawn roses often survive even severe cutting. She shook her head and smiled. "These roots are fine," she said. "You cut a new dawn rose all the way down, the roots just sit and wait," came back some of them. She showed Raymond 3 small canes, pale green, coming up from the old root base along the south fence. He knelt down in the dirt and looked at them for a long time. "How long until it blooms?" he asked. "Give it 2 seasons," she said, "maybe 3, but it'll come back." The house at number 21 was purchased in March 2022 by a young couple, Marcus and Alina Delgado, both teachers with a toddler and a baby on the way. They introduced themselves to every neighbor within the first week. They brought a pie to Dolores Hutchins and a 6-pack to Gus Petrano, and they stood on Raymond's porch one Saturday afternoon and listened to him talk about Carol's rose bush while their toddler tried to help water the pepper plants. Marcus Delgado started coaching the 12 and under baseball team in April. He and Raymond coached side by side. "You know what I think about when I think about Raymond Kowalski? I think about how he documented everything from the very first day, before he even knew why. Before the rose bush, before the salt, before any of it, he started writing it down because that's what a trained, disciplined man does. He prepares. He doesn't react emotionally. He builds quietly and carefully toward a moment he can't yet see. I think about how he sat on that porch on the morning of November 18th in the cold with his coffee and his old jacket, and he didn't watch the sheriff's vehicle. He looked at the trees. There's something in that, something worth holding onto. We live in a world that rewards loudness, entitlement. The person who yells the longest, demands the most, files the most complaints. We've built systems that seem to reward that kind of energy, at least for a while. But here's the thing about a while. It ends. And the men and women who were never loud, who built cases in brown notebooks, who planted things and tended them, who coached kids and made birdhouses and kept their discipline even when the woman next door destroyed what their late wife planted, those people are still standing when the moving trucks come. The new dawn rose came back, it always does. By the summer of 2023, it had climbed 4 feet up the fence again. By last spring, it was blooming, pale pink, nearly white at the edges, fragrant on the mountain breeze in the mornings. Raymond says it smells like Carol's grandmother's house. He never met Carol's grandmother, but Carol told him that once and he remembered. That's love, folks. That's what it looks like after 31 years. A climbing rose you tend alone on a fence in the mountains because she would have wanted it there. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Never mistake patience for permission. And never, not ever, pick a fight with a veteran who has already survived everything the world has thrown at him and come home and chosen to plant roses anyway. Thank you for watching. Drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever had a neighbor like Veronica? And have you ever known a man like Raymond? Because I think a lot of you have. And I think a lot of you are him. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.